Data isn't going to change anybody, right? Like, this is no diss. We need the data. Data is our proof point. But it's stories and experiences that change people. And so I'm kind of focused on like the space between information and feelings. But if you translate that into something physical, immersive, or even beautiful, they're going to spend more time with it.
Welcome back to this week's episode of Artside Currents. I'm your host, Nissia John, and today's guest spent 25 years as an award-winning graphic designer before walking away from it all to build a fine art practice rooted in something most of us take for granted every single day: the weather. She takes raw climate data and turns it into something you can stand in front of and simply feel. Along the way, we get into simplicity, slowness, beauty, and what it actually costs to leave a stable career behind and bet on yourself instead. This is a conversation about translation between data and emotion, between structure and freedom. Let's meet Michelle. So, Michelle, it's so great to have you on this episode of Artside Currents. I really love to get into so many things with you, but first, of course, we need a bit of context. I know you started with design and now you're doing visual art based on weather data and so many other things. Can you just give me like a little backstory on how you got from design to where you are right now?
Whew, yeah, cool's note of my life story. So let's see. So I always wanted to be an artist, but when I grew up, I have very practical parents. They immigrated from Britain. So I'm a first generation Canadian. And it was always kind of implied that perhaps I should get a job that could support myself and my family. And arts wasn't always considered a way to do that. So I went into graphic design. So still a creative job or creative career, but I could hopefully earn money from that. So I started there and I've done every sort of design known to man. I did it for 25 years. I've won over 40 awards for my work. So I focused mainly on communication design and some marketing in annual reports, large form documents, research documents. And what I really enjoyed about design was translating data into information that was easier to understand. And so I kept that. I was happy, but it's always for someone else, right? You're solving the client's problem in design. I never really got to put my spin on it completely. When you're working in design, you are emulating someone else's brand, their values, you're solving their problem. And that's a great creative challenge, but I never felt like I was getting myself out. And so I started side hustles, right? So I started by making jewelry on the side and selling it to people I worked with. And then I did a glass class one weekend because I'd always loved glass. That was the medium I wanted to go into in arts. So I took a glass fusing class one weekend, and then the next day I went back and bought the kiln that was in the window. And then I moved into casting glass. And so that's a lot more energy heavy, a lot more time consuming, but burnt out during COVID and decided to go full time with my art because that's what my brain needed in that moment. So that kind of opened up a whole new world. Your life is always like the layers of the onion, right? Like they're always uncovering something and growing somewhere new. So that just kind of propelled me into a different direction. So yeah, now I'm a fine artist, mixed media, abstract, and the design is kind of left behind in a way.
You describe going through so many different periods of unfolding your artistic voice. I like that you said peeling off the layers of an onion because you kind of go from this, exploration in glass to something even more practical and technical. And it just gets even deeper and deeper into what your work currently is now. And you mentioned, though, that you haven't really been able to use design currently, but I feel like your mentality for how you approach art and how you approach creation is coming from a design thinking style. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, for sure. I think this is one of those things I struggled with for a long time. So when I left the design career due to burnout, obviously I wanted to leave it behind. And so it was not to touch my fine art career at all. I wanted them separate. I needed that just for my head to let go of that career. But then I found myself kind of like sputtering and struggling along this artistic journey. And I sat myself down and I'm like, why are you leaving behind 25 years of all these skill sets that you're very, very good and respected for when they apply to art? Like if you think about design and art, the foundation is the same, right? So, you still have color theory, you still have composition rules, like they're all still very valid. I think it's just the output that changes. Whereas art, you're trying to ask questions of the person. You're not solving a problem, you're trying to promote thought around an issue. So it's almost the thinking is opposite. And so I struggled with that for a while because I was thinking, how can I solve a problem with my art? And that's not actually what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to actually make you stop and think critically about what I'm trying to research myself. I don't want you to come up with a conclusion in that moment. I just want you to hold and pause, and then we can create discussion. My whole theme this year is simplicity, so I'm really trying to simplify down and down to really try to relax, I suppose.
I think that's such an interesting thing to embrace because, structure is something that I think members of the community who are art scientists or consider themselves navigating between different worlds, they feel like they have to often battle between this structure and this free flowing creativity. And I think that's an interesting tension to be between. In our first conversation, you talked about a mentor who had you justify almost every part of your design pieces. Do you think that's where that structure might be coming from?
Oh, 100%, 100%, and that's why it's hard to let go of that too, right? Because our systems are built for that structure. So if we think about science specifically, like, science is trying to proof point, right, for the issues, and if you think about, like, a scientific journal, it's very structured and very long format, and this is what it is. But I think when you get then into the arts, you have to think it's a different audience. So how do you translate the data and the information for the audience that you're trying to attract? I think we were also talking about how I'm trying to create emotion with my work. So how do we make the visualization kind of more emotionally resonant? And I think data doesn't necessarily change people, but stories and experiences do. And so I think that's the whole difference when we're trying to showcase data in a different way. I'm trying to create a doorway into the data, if that makes sense. So I'm not trying to take that scientific journal and or that scientific data and give you a finished product that represents it. I'm actually flipping it back again and saying, "Okay, the data is actually the starting point." And now where we go, we're going into other systems and networks to try to create this kind of larger picture we're gonna talk about.
Yeah. I think this element of process across many iterations or many versions of itself is something that really is inherent to like this integrative mindset. There's so many elements of the art, of the science, of the design thinking of the world that you want to put into your work. But then the way that that actually unfolds in an integrative way is just takes more than just putting pieces together and calling it, the sum of the parts. It's really about seeing how these things interact so that there is an experience that can come from it. I really want to tie into that data as a starting point because you use weather data and climate data for your research. Why did you choose that starting point? Like, what drew you to the weather?
So let's see. I wrote this down. Okay. I often say my work is about weather, but increasingly I think weather is the doorway rather than the destination. I've always been fascinated by clouds and storms. I live in Alberta, so thunderstorms in June and July are fantastic. Anyway, there's something inherently awe-inspiring about storms. What keeps me to returning weather is that it reveals larger systems at work. Climate change is difficult because it doesn't have a single viable cause. It's the cumulative result of countless decisions, behaviors, industries, and infrastructure interacting over time. A flood, a wildfire, or a tornado isn't caused by any one thing, but it's connected to a much larger network of relationships. And that complexity is what interests me. So, weather gives us a way to see those systems becoming visible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you're interested in all the different parts of what creates the weather data itself.
Yeah, a lot of people say that my stuff looks like clouds, and I had a theme of cloud gazing once, but it's actually almost like my entire practice is a form of cloud gazing in a way. I'm looking at all the different aspects that come together to create this final result, right? So I think we talked about this before, but like data is super overwhelming, especially right now in the world. Like, I mean, our phone allows us, or our computers allow us access to the entire world at once, which is amazing but also really overwhelming for our brains. If you look even at, like, our news feeds, like, the reason that I think climate change discussion gets overlooked, there's loads of data about it, like, tons and tons and tons, but almost too much, and it's not translated in a way that's easy to understand. I think a lot of climate change activists, they start with, like, the big problem, like fossil fuels and fast fashion, plastics, and, they're gonna chain themselves to a tree or throw red paint on someone wearing fur or whatever that is, but that's to get attention, right? And it's focusing on a big problem, and they are big problems. I'm not saying they're not, but I think it's more important perhaps to understand how those things fit within a larger ecosystem because it's not just fossil fuels, it's not just plastics. It's far more nuanced than that, and that's where people get lost.
Yeah, I think the complexity is a really interesting point. Like you said, there's no problem with narrowing in on a particular problem, but when you narrow in and don't take into account that there are other factors that are influencing things? Are you able to make connections beyond the result that is before you? And so then in your own process then, like how do you choose or how do you create that starting point for yourself in this wealth of data that's available?
Yeah. You know what? I think my first collection that I did, I focused on Canada. I'm very proud to be Canadian. So I looked at weather data within Canada just to see what there was. So I picked the year that it was. I think it was 2023, because it all has to be historical. It was probably 2024. And I looked at 2023's data just to see what came up. So Government Canada does a report every year about the most extreme weather events in Canada. And I thought that was fascinating. So I looked at 10 of those just to see what I could pull from that. And so it was a bit of a mishmash. And then the second series I did, I felt very impacted by all the wildfires that were going on. There was a lot happening in Kelowna. I had a friend that was actually displaced by the Kelowna wildfire. And then we had the one in LA that seemed massive and it was just in the news at that time. And so I focused on my second series and still now I'm using wildfire data. It seems to be one that I just gravitated towards. It's definitely one that's going to catch your eye. It's also not got any one source of cause, if you will. You know, it's a weather done like one was caused by lightning, one was caused by extreme drought and heat. That's not something you necessarily blame on a person, but our systems created that issue. Doing the research into what started them and how they were dealt with is quite fascinating to me. It's not anything you'll see in the final result, but I think I just enjoy that research aspect too.
Interdisciplinary ideas are exciting to imagine, but surprisingly hard to build. Not because the idea isn't good, but because without a clear structure, even the most compelling concepts can delay. The Art Science in Motion framework is a digital workbook with that structure. 5 guided modules will take you from a scattered idea to a defined, testable proof of concept. Our easy to follow worksheets will help you name what you're doing, understand why it matters, and give you a roadmap for all that comes next. Download your copy at creart.ca/store.
So a lot of my art is actually looking at myself within this ecosystem, right? Obviously, I can't affect a forest fire, but then, okay, what other systems are connected? And then how can I be part of that betterment or change? And a lot of the time that's in my materials. So this is where it starts to, I think, confuse people because they're not necessarily related in an obvious way. So I use glass a lot. I told you I was a glass artist and went more mixed media. I still use glass a lot in my practice. And people ask me why. What is it about glass that you like, right? And so at first, when I was working in glass, I moved to recycled glass, mainly for cost reasons. But then I thought I was being better for the environment. But then as you drill down into that, I think it depends again how you look at that data to think, am I or am I not? Because glass to produce it is hugely resource heavy, and glass to recycle it is more resource heavy. So is it better to recycle glass or is it better to create new? Or should we just reduce? So I do use a lot of recycled glass. I've also transformed it from its original. So I crush it down from bottles and windows. So I'm remaking it in a way that is less resource heavy. It's heavy on my shoulder, but it's not heavy in an energy sense, right? I use it to refer to human excess because it looks like glitter. So it's got that opulence kind of aspect to it. And then if you want to look at glass as just not as on the environmental side, but as the medium itself, glass is fabulous at transmitting and reflecting light. So a lot of the time when I first started, I did a lot with mirrors because I like to reflect the viewer within the work. It will reflect light, it will change in the environment itself. So it's affected by wherever you put the piece. And so I like that it's not a static art piece. You have to experience it.
There's a lot of emotion in your process in terms of how you're interpreting the world and how you're seeing the world. And then try to evoke emotion from the audience or from the viewer. What is that desire for emotion to come out of your work?
I think where that comes from is data isn't going to change anybody, right? Like, this is no diss. We need the data. Data is our proof point. But it's stories and experiences that change people. So, data itself isn't inherently emotional. So, most people can encounter data as like numbers, graphs, charts. These are incredibly important, but they also require like a certain level of literacy and attention and time. And so I'm kind of focused on like the space between information and feeling. So if I tell someone a wildfire burned a certain amount of hectares, they can understand that. But if you translate that into something physical, immersive, or even beautiful, so contradictory of the data itself, they're going to spend more time with it. They're gonna develop a different relationship with it, and you never really know where that's gonna go, but that's kind of interesting too. So, it kinda happens when people stop just consuming information and start experience it. So, I was thinking about this before we started chatting. It's almost like stop and smell the roses. Like,
Yeah.
we used to say that all the time. I haven't heard anyone say that in a long time. I feel like I need to do a show on that, like, try to make the data into, like, florals or something. I don't know, I gotta write that down.
Look at the ideas coming out already.
We're just getting there, move from clouds into flowers. It might be a little obvious, but at the same time, I think sometimes you need that obvious lead in. That even leads back to design, right? I remember working with a scientist on a paper she wanted to publish, and we were making it into this big report. And of course, she loved all the long format stuff. And I started reading it. I'm like, who's reading this? And she's like, oh, well, just, the greater community and blah, blah. I'm like, you know, no, they're not. No, they're not, honey. Other scientists may read this, but the average person will not understand a word that you're saying here.
I think there's something in that too with the way that your work is abstract because in literal data as well, like you have the choice to either sit and understand it or just kind of walk away because you don't understand it. But in the way that your work is developed, I almost feel like because of the shapes and the topography that you use, it forces someone to have to stop and think and experience and ask questions just because there's so much in there, but also there isn't at the same time because you don't see the data, like, right there at the forefront, at the face of the work. Do you feel like people are really absorbing?
Yeah, and that's fascinating because I love watching how people respond to the work. I think that's a big part of why artists do what they do. My first series, I'd say there's quite a lot of confusion, but I think that was how it was spoken to because I talked heavily about the data aspect, and I think people expected that I was trying to translate that data into a finished thing. So if I said, "Oh, that was data from a wildfire," they're like, "But I don't see the wildfire." Right? Or they were trying to make it into a wildfire. "Oh, I see the wildfire because you've done this with this material." And I'm like, "No, no, that wasn't what I was trying to do there." So I think I have to be cautious. And that's why I wrote you that little statement about it's more about the systems around us. And that's another reason I'm trying to get even more simplified with the data too. I think on my current work, there is this very topography type look. And so you can relate that again to environment really easily, but it's not a direct link to that data. So it can cause confusion. I remember I had a show in, Vancouver, and I remember this one guy, he was looking at a piece, and it used data from a flood in Quebec, and it kinda had that a wavy bog-like look, but then he's like, "Well, what data did you use?" And I said, "Oh, I used weather data from a month around the actual event, like temperature data." And he's like, "But shouldn't you be using flood data?" And he got really mad at me that I didn't use data related to the like, specific, like, water data related to the flood. I mean, I can use any data. Again, it really doesn't matter. The data is to get you into the conversation and to create kind of the structure of my work. So, say it is a forest fire and it happened on June 15th. What I'm gonna do is pull the weather data from the closest airport around that date. It's a big bar chart that's, colored. Hot is red, cold is blue. What I'll do is then draw around groupings of the colors. And so it's just really, really loose, really drawing around that. And then I remove the data, I digitize it, and then I redraw it. So I accentuate the curves and the loops and whatever so that it becomes my style. So in fact, I've actually already abstracted it away from the data already. It no longer represents the data, but it's giving me then a foundation of shapes to use. And then I use those shapes to create my formations of clouds. My gallery likes to say I take weather data and make it more atmospheric, which I think is a really beautiful way to kind of just clarify that. So now what I want to do is take one piece, so one shape from that weather data set. I just pull one piece out. Then I can say it's a piece of a larger puzzle. And I think that will make it, easier for people to understand I'm not trying to finish the data and make it something. I'm giving you an element out of this larger picture, and there's all these pieces.
That explanation really made something click for me because I think about negative space and positive space in artwork, and it's almost like your work is filling in the gaps of what's not represented in a way where, like, there is data there, but there's so much more to the story, and it's like the clouds that you create or the formations that you create are alluding to that there's something else that's happening here as well, but also look at how this was formed from the data itself.
It's amazing. I get all sorts of responses from this. And that's what I love too. Again, different entry points. People, every person has a different perspective and will enter the piece different. Some people just like it because it's pretty and shiny. And that's fine by me. I'll take your money and you can put it up in your house. Yeah. Yeah. But like then there's people who want to know, well, what does the data mean? And so then we have this discussion. I remember I did an artist talk at an opening and there was a bunch of tech people in the room, which was a fascinating audience. So I remember this one guy, he was an IT guy and he came up to me and he was like, "Whoa." He was a little drunk by this time too. He'd had a few drinks at the opening and he went into this whole story about how this one piece reminded him of how he loved surfing and he hasn't done it in a few years and he's really sad about that. But he had this like a wave map. He has it in his office to remind him of this time. And so like the shapes in my thing reminded him of the wave map. And then he started crying and he was so happy. And I'm like, wow, okay. Like that's fantastic, right? Like now we can have this discussion about surfing and obviously he loves the ocean. So maybe there's an in to talk about that sort of thing, right? So it's really just an opening for discussion. I had another guy, he was a biochemist, and so he was really interested in just the textures in the work and how he thought they related to like phosphorescence in the fishing industry. And so we got talking about that. And so again, nothing to do with me or the work itself. And so it's irrelevant as long as they understand that it's about climate change and I've used data that gets the science brains in there and they're like, yeah, okay, well, let's talk about my thing. And like, I almost failed high school chemistry, but I use chemistry now every day. My chemistry teacher would be thrilled. Right? Like, it's just, it unlocks, I think, it just unlocks a different way of thinking. What I want you to see is this is what I've learned or what I'm experiencing right now. Where are you? So maybe I'm asking the question, where are you? What do you want to talk about? If you want to talk about it at all. And that seems really small, but perhaps in this world of extreme overwhelm, those small acts are really what's going to create some movement. We always want to do the big thing, right? We got to save the world tomorrow. We're not going to, right? We have to just kind of gently prod because we talked about that before. Am I an activist? People have asked me that before, and I don't consider myself an activist. So perhaps beauty is a form of activism. Yeah. But it's not in a traditional form of how we think of activism because my pieces are beautiful, right? I take disastrous stuff and I make them pretty. Let me see, what did I write down? I said, my work is not trying to persuade people through shock or confrontation. I'm more interested in attraction. Beauty tends to draw people in, color, light, wonder. So that moment of realization is important because then that sparks something, right? Whether it's to ask questions about that data or to be like, I don't get it, or right? Like it opens up just kind of that moment. It creates attention. And attention creates reflection, and then reflection can lead to change.
Yeah, that's so different from, I guess, the way the rest of the world, goes forward with activism. Because you think of protests, you think of things flying and people being heard and people being detained. But to take a complete opposite direction with that and propose activism as something that's beautiful, really changes the whole story.
You just nailed it on the head. So activism is always trying to break the system. Everything is extreme in our world right now. So for me to break the system, I'm actually trying to stop you and slow you down. So it's now flipped to the opposite. So while it doesn't seem like activism, it is because I'm breaking the mold of get off your phone, get off your phone.
Breaking the mold to be slow. I love this slow approach that you're pushing because you also talked about simplicity earlier, and that's your goal for this year. And you talked about glass as something being soft. It just feels like that's a connection point between softness, slowness, simplicity that's coming out in your work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I always see glass as a bit of a paradox. It's soft and seductive, but also it can be sharp and deadly. So maybe that is that juxtaposition of our world and what I'm trying to get people to do. Right. And so when I use my glass, it tends to be, yeah, in a really soft, reflective sense. I mean, you could say the broken glass has shards, but it's more glittery.
There we have it again. It's like presenting the hard and the rough part of the activism as something that's beautiful.
I like that. Beauty is a form of activism by getting people to slow down and pay attention to it. I've always been trained to move fast, get the thing, move up, move up, move up. And ever since I've quit my corporate job, while I have to move fast as an entrepreneur, I also have to slow down the art. Otherwise, you're just producing it and you can tell that there's no feeling or thought behind it. It just becomes a thing. So for me, I have to really slow down and let things sit for a while. I used to finish pieces really quickly. Now I'll start a piece and then I have to let it sit. And now I'm tests that I did that I threw out like 2 years ago and I'm bringing them back and be like, hey, what was interesting about that? Maybe we can take that forward now. Right. So it's really, there's reflection, there's a whole lot of calmness that's required, and that's really difficult for me, but I think that's necessary because if I can do it, you'll see it and feel it in the work, and perhaps that will get you to do the same.
Yeah, this integrative process really is slow. I mean, even learning that this week, trying to plan parts of the nonprofit and just make a roadmap for where we're going and what we've done and what we're trying to do. And I realized in my brain, I want to like do all the projects right now. Like, oh my gosh, people need this solution. It should be out next month, next week. Let's get going. And I realized that the more we try to rush it, is the less I get to listen to the process. And so by listening and really slowing down how things are going to be set up and how they're going to be put out into the world, it changes the priority and the focus of what we have to do right now. And so I really like this element of being slow.
And I was just thinking about my entrepreneurial journey and like how capitalism forces us to move fast because we need an end product, we need capital. So there's a part of that overlaid on it all as well. And that's not easy to balance, especially when you have your mortgage to pay. But I think in a collaboration space, I think it's really important just to listen to one another. And perhaps you may not get to go as slow as you want to, but you can perhaps ask a few extra questions that might make your partner slow down a bit if they are pushing too hard and too fast. I mean, we all have to make deadlines. That's just a reality of the world. So I think it's just a balancing act of being as reflective as you can within the constraints of reality.
Yeah. You talked about this project that you were working on. I think it's the water jet company. Where you proposed like a particular solution and they were not having it. What was that process like?
I dabble in a lot of male-dominated spaces with my work because there's quite a lot of industrial aspects to my work, and those are still very male-dominated roles, trades, etc. My dad was a tradesman, so I think I've never shied away from that sort of world. I had this idea. I really wanted to make these huge life-size animals out of recycled glass. So I cast these large slabs of broken window glass, and I needed them to be water jet. So I'm like, okay, they have to be water jet. I just took a little small sample and I went tootled on down to the one of the water jet shops in town, and I walked in and I asked the guy, I'm like, "Hey, I've made this slab. Here's my big grand idea. Can we test it?" And yeah, at first he gave me all the reasons why it couldn't work. Well, you could have bubbles in that glass and it could explode, or like he was trying to teach me something. I find I get this a lot when I go into these spaces is I obviously don't understand their world, and I think it's a subconscious bias for them. I don't think they're trying to be rude. It's just again, it's how that space works. And so I said, "Okay, I understand all of that." So you have to kinda talk to them in their language a bit, right? So I'm like, "I understand all that. I'm aware of all the risks. I will pay for this. Can we just try it? If it's no like, there's no safety concerns on your end, can we just put it on a machine, give her a go?" And he was like, "Well, I guess so. We can try this." And I'm like, "Okay." So he tries it, and it comes back and it looks fantastic, and it works. And he's like, "Well, I'm surprised it actually worked really well." I'm like, "Yeah, fascinating that it did that right." So and so then I took back the big project to him, and then I'm like, "Okay, I wanna water jet some metal," and then that was this thing he understood. He said, "Oh, yeah, we can do that." And so we did that, and then I did a little video when we were doing it. Oh my gosh, and then it worked out so well, and then I did some more little ones, and now he emails me every 6 months, and he's like, "Hey, Michelle, when are you bringing back some more when are we gonna do some more stuff?" Right? Like, that was fun. 'Cause now I'm their fun client, like, I do stuff that they don't that gets them away from the widgets that they have to produce. I'm helping them to create something different, and so now they're actually excited when I walk in the shop. They're like, "Oh, yeah, Michelle, she does this stuff with glass, you should go to see this." Right? So it's kind of it's interesting to flip the script with some of them, and then it gets them thinking about, "Oh, we could probably do that." So now I come in with a crazy idea, like, "Okay, yeah, what you got? Let's do it." Like, there's no problems whatsoever.
Quick question. Have you ever felt like the only person in the room who cares about the logic and the creativity, the experiment and the exhibition, the data set and the performance? Well, you're not alone, you just haven't found your people yet. The CREMAP Directory of Innovators and Art Scientists is the CREART Foundation's global directory of multidisciplinary minds, a searchable, growing community of practitioners who live exactly at that intersection. Create your free profile, get discovered, and find collaborators who actually speak your interdisciplinary language. To learn more, head to creart.ca/cremap. That's creart.ca/CREMAP and join the network.
So I actually don't look at failure as a bad thing. I look at it as a very positive word. Because if you knew you were going to succeed in 2 more failures, how fast would you fail, right? But failure teaches us things, right? So if we don't fail, we don't learn. And we all need to learn in order to grow. So we have to fail. We have to play. Maybe play is an easier word for people to understand. I know people, when you talk about the arts, people always think of, I'm trying to get back to my childhood self that wasn't restricted by anything so that I can play. Play is failure, right? I do think there's similar things, but kids don't see it as failure. They just see it as having fun and trying stuff. Again, our systems and stuff stop us from playing and from failing, and because we are terrified of someone pointing it out that we failed. But if someone points it out that we failed, like, "Yeah, but we learned this, this, and this, so guess what? Next time it'll be even better."
It's almost like it takes us right back to the beginning when we mentioned having to choose a career that is going to set you up for success and you're going to be able to be financially free. And instead of being allowed to explore something that you really might be interested in or that your creative side might want to get into more deeply, we create these systems and structures so people can feel less failure. So that, okay, if you go in this direction, you will be able to be set up for life when you're good. You don't have to fail as an artist, you don't have to fail as a dancer, you're just good to go. What was that tension like for you when you were making that transition from something that seemed more corporate and steady to something now where you have to be your own motivator almost?
That was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my entire life. And again, that's because we're trained. You go get the education, you go get the job, you buy the house, you up the corporate ladder. Like that is the progression that we're taught, or at least my generation was taught. And so to break that, there's huge tension. There's guilt. Like, oh, I'm not supposed to do this. Oh, my parents might be mad if I do this. It's always about something else or someone else. It's never about yourself inherently. I think also because our system is based on capital, right? We live in capitalism. You need money to survive. And so you have to have a viable product in order to survive. Art isn't typically viewed as a viable product. In fact, my accountant, the first thing she said to me when I started my own business, she's like, "You're my most high risk client." And I was like, "What? What are you talking about? I'm not high risk. I'm an artist." She's like, "You're not thinking about it in the way an accountant is thinking about it. You're high risk because you may not pay my bill next year, right? Because your income streams are up and down like this." And so in that transition, I fought it and fought it and fought it and fought it and fought it for years. I think what forced me to do it was actually a mental health crisis, right? So it wasn't, I was forced to make that decision. Whether that meant being an entrepreneur or not, I didn't necessarily have to choose that route. I could have gone into a different career or a different job, perhaps. But in that moment, I didn't see any other option. The only option I saw was I have to be a full-time artist. Like this is now, I think it also kind of coincided with COVID and, there's all those thoughts. It's funny what crisis changes in yourself and how you look at things. So I think life changes also force you down different paths. Like we went back to the layers of the onion. So me becoming a full-time artist, it had to happen. And honestly, I am stubborn enough as a person that I knew I'd make it happen. And my closest circle, once I did it, they're like, "Well, why didn't you do that years ago?" The only pushback I've got is my mother. Love her to death, but her generation, she's very concerned that I will not make enough money to support myself. And I sometimes have to just let that opinion go. And I'd say that's probably the hardest part for anyone who wants to explore being a full-time artist is drowning out the noise of others. Because the more you listen to others and question, like if they say something to you and it makes you question yourself and go, oh, it's going to slow you down. So while feedback is important, it's learning to filter the feedback to the stuff that relates to you. Do your own research, follow your own intuition, take the advice where it makes sense, but let the rest go.
I feel like this is exactly what a lot of people want to hear and need to hear. Just there are so many that I've spoken to the last 2 years, people who are in this directory and don't know how to make that transition, where they're stuck between the security of their job, of being a scientist, of being a student. And it just feels really difficult to just really take the step and hop over to do something where you're fully the leader of your own ideas and your own creativity.
It
That's
is. I mean,
hard.
it does take a certain personality type for sure. And you gotta understand there's nothing wrong with having a full-time job and doing these things on the side. If that's where your comfort is, don't feel guilt over that. I did the 9 to 5 and art on the side for years, and it was fine for a while, and then suddenly it wasn't. So I think only make the jump if you really have to. You don't have to at all. I don't know why there is kind of this underlying thing in the industry that if you are in the arts, it should be your full-time thing. But like rarely is it just you paint and that's it. I don't just make these sculptural pieces. Like, I have many different revenue streams in order for it to work for me. Like, I have another kinda side art business where I actually make more functional, like, fine craft work that I sell in bulk. So that actually helps pay the bills. A lot of people teach, and that's cool because teaching is a great kind of you're in and you're out, so it can be part-time, whether it's in science or the arts or maybe both. You can still kind of engage and give back to people and then do your other work on the side from that as well. So I think you just have to think about it differently. I think it's because we're trying to frame it the same as a full-time job, and it's not. It's a way of living, and you have to determine the pieces that go together to create the business.
That's exactly what I want to get into because the name art science and art creation really isn't the structure right now for that to be supported by funding. There's just such limited opportunity, especially in Canada right now. Submitting a proposal to do art science, it's very far and few between. And so for you to actually have this be sustainable, you really have to think outside of the box. And I feel like you've done that in so many ways with the different corporate networks that you go through and the different industries that you go through. You really have to think out of the box, not just in your process and the development of the work that you're creating, but also in how it's done so that it's sustainable for the future and the climate that we're in. I'd love to finish off though with just a bit of encouragement for the art scientist entrepreneur. What encouragement do you have for someone who may be hesitant to get to that next point in their career or next point where they're willing to take that leap?
And I don't wanna seem cliche, but, like, follow your heart. It takes a lot of grit and a lot of effort to do this. I think you really have to understand this may not sound inspirational, but I think it's necessary. You have to really be willing to go for it. You have to put everything into it. You have to be willing to sacrifice, and I don't think that's advice people give out very often. I think people are like, "Yeah, you can do anything. You can do whatever you want. Hooray, ah." But that's not the reality of the world, okay? So I think what really comes into it is think differently about how to structure your world. I think right now is the perfect time to try something new in the world. The world is itching to try to break down systems, to open up new ideas, all this kind of thing. And I think I was having this discussion with an art friend the other day. We were talking about grants and RFPs, how difficult it is to get things through. But I think what it comes down to is really thinking about how you're framing it, right? So we were talking about creating an art publication, but there are no grants for that. No one wants to do publishing. The project then is not about the book. The project is about the community connection around the arts. If you want something, you just have to frame it in a way that will respond to the people giving away the money, right? Don't be afraid to ask for money. People want to support the arts. I think a lot of people just don't know how. Science probably has a few more structured things, but I imagine that's difficult as well. So again, I just think it's thinking differently. Think outside the box on how you wrap it and go for it. You're going to get a lot of no's. Sometimes it's really difficult to push through all the no's that you're going to get. For every 100 no's, you might get one yes. And that's daunting. It's a reality, but daunting. Just keep going. Just keep
Yeah.
swimming.
Oh my goodness.
Just keep swimming.
Michelle teaches us that attention is not a small thing. In a world built to move fast and demand more of us at every turn, choosing to slow down, simplify, and really look at something might be one of the most quietly radical acts available to us. What stays with me the most, though, is her willingness to walk away from certainty and build something of her own from scratch. Michelle's story is a reminder that an interdisciplinary career doesn't just call for a new kind of process or a new kind of product. It calls for imagining an entirely new structure for how that work can exist and sustain itself in the world we're actually living in. This kind of new structure is what we're here to build at the CreArt Foundation, and I hope you'll continue to join us as we navigate the future of art science and innovation. There we have it, another intersection in motion. Thanks for joining us in this episode of Art Sidecards, where conversations between disciplines become new ways of thinking, creating, and connecting. If you've ever felt pulled between disciplines, this space is for you.
and I hope this conversation inspires you to see what's possible in your own journey. This episode was proudly produced by the CreArt Foundation for Art Science Innovation. I'm your host and founder, Nissia John, and these conversations were made possible by the volunteer support of Broom Bettler, our lead project assistant, audio editing by Andrea Gutierrez, and video content formatting by Nomina Ramarari. If this conversation resonated with you, pass it along to someone between disciplinary worlds. Explore more episodes and interdisciplinary projects at creart.ca. That's www.crearte.ca. See you in the next episode, and stay curious, stay interdisciplinary. Let's keep the art science current in motion.